Steve Lovejoy. I first spoke with you, I don't know how many years ago.
Oh goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, back in 2005, roughly, or
Somewhere around there, I believe.
right in there about this book and about the operation. And since then, it's turned out to be a great memoir, a biography of Marines in Vietnam.
Hmm.
And as we get now, it's already 2024. It seems to me it's time to get the word out about Vietnam veterans and the honor and sacrifice that you guys made, much like we did for the World War II generation back in the
Hmm.
90s. Uh,
Yeah.
you remember
Yeah.
Saving Private Ryan and Band
Hmm.
of Brothers and all that. So,
Hmm.
but now reflecting back, what are your thoughts? Being a Vietnam veteran and what I just said about honoring you guys and kind of getting the word out, I guess is the best way to say it.
Uh-huh. Well, I've got to throw a little short story in here because it just shows the irony of how things happen, whether good or bad, when you encounter uh, the situation where you're in the military. I was working for Montgomery Ward in their warehouse, and I one day I was going to join the Navy. I was all set up to join the Navy, and I took my lunch break, and down on the dock a little farther, there was a truck being loaded. And I went down to look, and it said Booth Packing Company, sea rations, destined for Vietnam, of course. And I thought, I don't need to eat those things. I'm going to be on a Navy ship. It's just, I laughed about it. Oh, those poor guys that got to eat that stuff. So time went on, ended up getting my draft notice late, joined the Marine Corps for some reason rather than getting drafted. And everything that I did in boot camp and all the things that happened just seemed like it was just I was destined to go to Vietnam as a grunt. It just seemed like if you wanted to do something, being a grunt just fell into place. It just happened. So then I got there and I was with John Love, who was, I guess I would call him my boot camp buddy, and another gentleman by the name of Paul Gunlack, who's I've been in touch with. He was on Swift. He lives in Florida, I believe. We got there and were met by just the remainder of Mike Company that had stayed behind because they were out on Operation DeSoto. And during that time, we weren't doing anything. And one day, somebody came up and says, "Hey, we need some trucks unloaded." So I went to unload this truck and I look at it and it says, "Sea Rations, Booth Packing Company, Modesto, California." That just wasn't fair. You know, I
So
could
it was
not
the
believe that
same.
happened because
Okay.
they weren't the only place that was making sea rations. And so for that to end up with the unit that I was with, I thought, wow, you know. So
Wow.
when the guys came back from on my company came back from DeSoto, I was kind of taken under the wing of Fred Tanky and um, Dave Ryan, and
So
they helped.
this is obviously already in Vietnam. Is
Yeah,
this what time, what month and year is this?
I'm
Is
sorry. Yeah, I got to Vietnam in the middle of February of 1967.
okay.
Had my 21st birthday somewhere crossing the international date line. I really never had February 16th, didn't exist.
Hmm.
Anyway, yeah, we got there the middle of February, and we got a visit by Robert Mitchum, who has become my favorite actor. He was very cordial and seemed to care about us. He came out there by himself with a driver in the middle of the night to visit us. And it wasn't a totally secure area, but he did
Okay.
that. And then we ran some small patrols and some fire team ambushes, and not much went on.
Is this
Then we
still in
were on
February,
Operation,
or is
I'm
this in
sorry,
March? Is this March or February?
February, March, into April. And then Operation Union 1 and 2 happened, ran from the middle of April into June for both operations. On June 2nd, I was wounded and medevaced out. And in that situation, we were on this old CH-34 Korean War vintage helicopter, which Marines used a lot because Marines at that time were kind of the stepchild of the military. We all got hand-me-downs from the Army and had way too many people in it. Figured we weren't going to get off the ground. Nobody wanted to get off, but we were overloaded. And I thought, fine, here it is, 12 midnight, and we're going to be rocketed because they really like shooting down helicopters.
Mhm.
He couldn't get off the ground, but finally got up about 10 feet, got some forward airspeed, and got up in the air, and we were okay. Landed in Chuai, went through that. I was there for a couple of weeks, and ran a few patrols in the summer. Not much happened. Guarded some bridges, and then Father Capodanno showed up in late August, and I remember going to speak with him and hearing some of his sermons and such. But
And who was he specifically as far as your battalion? Was he your
Father
battalion?
Capodanno, yeah, Vincent Capodanno was a Navy chaplain who joined 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, my company being part of that, in the month of August for a short time. So he was our battalion chaplain for a while. We're
Okay.
going to be anyway. That was the plan. And if anybody had asked me after I got home how long he had been there, I would have said 3 months, but it was really like 3 weeks. He had that kind of an impact on everybody. And so then Operation Swift happened. Now,
So,
normally,
well, back to Father Capodanno, you said
sure.
you attended some of his masses or whatever. Did
Uh-huh.
he, what kind of impression did he make on you when you first saw him, if any?
He was one of us. He was a grunt. He lived like we did. He ate the same food we ate. He related to us as a fellow Marine, and of
Okay.
course we honored his rank and such as a Navy. I think he was lieutenant at the time. Could have been a captain. I'm not sure of that, but he was a Navy officer. So we respected that. But he was just one of the guys, and that's what made him so easy to talk to. And also his sermons were easy to understand. Of course, quite often, whether he's talking about sports or cars or whatever, it would gravitate to more important things like, well, do you know where you're going to spend eternity if you happen to get hit? If you're dead, are you comfortable? And so I was able to assure him that yes, I was a Christian. I knew I was going to heaven if I got killed. And but he was like that, and he was concerned about our soul, but he was concerned about everyday life too. And so
So he
that
was
was,
he was kind of a comfort for you young guys.
yeah. He was somebody, like an older brother type of thing. He didn't treat us like he was our father. He treated us like he was a brother. And so
Okay.
you could be more open with him that way.
Okay.
And I had been a radio operator on and off from the time I got there. I volunteered to be an radio operator. Fred Tankey volunteered to walk point, and we weren't sure which one of us was more crazy than the other because walking point isn't necessarily the thing to do, or being a radio operator isn't really smart either.
Why
But
did you volunteer to be a radio operator?
I figured that by doing that, I could know more of what's going on, a little bit better of where we were, sort of. And also, when an ambush was sprung or we came under fire, let's say, the job of the radio operator is get down with his platoon commander, platoon sergeant. I didn't have to charge the enemy unless there was only two of us left.
Okay.
So it was kind of a self-preservation thing too. I figured if the first round doesn't get me, I'm okay. And but
Isn't
I
it
enjoyed the job.
isn't it true though that the enemy would kind of single out the radio operators?
Yeah,
They
right.
that antenna,
Yeah,
the antenna
and
farm.
and that's why I say if the first round didn't get me, I was okay. I'd be
Okay.
down. you know. And one quick story about Union One because it involves Fred Tankey, of who we'll talk about later. He was walking point. We were walking down a trail, well used, which we did a lot. Noticed there was some grade markers on my left side. All of a sudden, I got one round fired at me from the right, and there was a dry irrigation canal that a VC was there hiding. For some reason, he decided to shoot at me. Well, fortunately, he missed, but had he hit me, he would have hit me somewhere around the knee area because it hit one of the grade markers I found out later. So anyway, I emptied a magazine at him. He fired one round. I emptied 20 rounds. And platoon sergeant runs up and says, I thought I told you to fire just on semi-automatic. I said, I did. That was semi-auto on full adrenaline. I pulled the trigger so fast.
Okay.
And then that VC ran parallel to our column. Now everybody got down with one round let off. After a short time, we got up and started walking. He was running parallel, decided to make a left turn, came face to face with Fred. He fired first. He was like 4 feet away. Fortunately, he had a misfire. Fred took him out.
Okay.
Well, now the eerie thing about that is if he had not shot at me and done the same thing, that round would have worked and Fred would have been seriously wounded, if not killed.
Oh wow.
So that's kind of a divine intervention thing, I would say.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so Anyway, being the fact that I'd had a radio, usually if we were going out, even if it was just a daytime patrol, we'd always had time to check our radios, make sure the batteries worked and such. September 4th, we didn't because we weren't told until the morning of September 4th that we were going out on, at the time, a rescue operation. Mm-hmm. And so I grabbed all my gear, did radio checks, getting on the chopper. Everything seemed fine. Turns out we landed about, now you'll have to correct me on this, Doyle, because you know it better than I did. I think it was 2,000 meters from where we should have been, if I remember right, 1,500, something like that.
Right.
And JD's told the story about how he told everybody where we were, so I won't get into that. And so then we started a forced march to join up with 1-5, the H&S, command center of 1-5.
How did that morning start for you then? Was it before sunrise that you were
I honestly don't know. I can't tell you that. My understanding is we got up normal time and they said, everybody saddle up, we're going out. We boarded the choppers around 10 or 11, somewhere in that time in the morning. And, one thing that happens when you're on a chopper, unless you're the pilot or co-pilot or something, you don't know where you're going. Well, we flew around for maybe half an hour or longer, but actually we'd only got about 5-10 miles from Hill 63. So we just flew around in circles waiting for everybody to get formed up. And, so we had no idea where we were. The grunts, we didn't know where we were. We got off the chopper and they said, go that way. So we started what they call a company wedge formation. Each platoon had its own part of the V-shaped wedge. And so my radio was still working. Wasn't on it a lot. I was with Sergeant Marbury. And there came a time when we stopped and we started getting some sniper fire. And we were told, and I'm going to use some compass directions or other directions here a little bit, if it makes sense, I think. We were told to head to our east, which would have been making a right turn in a sense, because we were heading somewhat south. And so I remember turning to my right, and we were supposed to be like a pivot where the squad that I was in was going to pivot around and be able to face the enemy with everybody on line facing the enemy. In other words, we weren't in a single file column anymore. Well, during that process, we started to get mortared, and I hit the deck. And it turns out I was in a forward position where I shouldn't have been. Sergeant Marbury had stopped. I didn't know it with all the commotion. And I'm sure he stopped because he had to, but I didn't. And I kept going. So I ended up away from him. It turns out later, I found out that I was with another Marine. Oh my goodness. I'm going to have to look it up to be sure about this. But I'll just have to say another Marine right now because I don't want to get the name wrong. And I didn't even remember this until I heard some. Oh, have you heard my audio tape that I made about Swift?
Yes, the one that you made after the battle.
Yeah,
yes.
So it's in there. That audio tape I did not know about until like 2008 when Fred played it to me over the phone. He had got it from Ron Pisano, who had got it from JD Murray. And when I heard that, I don't remember making that audio, but it was me. I gave my service number and rank, and I talk about being in a position with another Marine. So I'm trying to tell people, go ahead.
Just get oriented. You guys your company, Mike 35, is being sent out to rescue another company that was ambushed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And did you know that at the time that you were on a rescue operation?
I think so. I believe that's true. But my understanding was all we were going to do in the end result was to furnish security for Hale Gardner's H&S company, headquarters company, along Highway 534. So we weren't necessarily going to, quote, rescue anybody. We were going to provide security to another unit from 1-5, I think. I get them mixed up, 1-5 and 2-5, but I think it was 1-5.
I think it's 1-5. And this is all in the Quế Sơn Valley.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess the NVA would come in, or the VC NVA would come in and come out, and they would ambush and then leave. Was it kind of like that? You didn't know where they were?
No, in fact, we didn't know that where they were until they started ambushing us. That's how much we didn't know
Okay.
as far as the average grunt. Command knew basically where they were, but they did not know where the elements of the second NVA division was when we were going south to join 1-5 because we walked right into their headquarters.
So
So
this was the second NVA
division,
North Vietnamese Army, and I guess
yes,
these are pretty veteran troops, right? These
yeah,
are
they had experience just like we did, and
okay.
they'd been trained up in North Vietnam, and we had pretty much knocked them out during the two Union operations, which were in a somewhat different location in the same valley.
Okay.
But then they had reformed, and they were basically, according to Colonel Tip. Now you'll know more about this than I do, but if I remember correctly, Colonel Tip, who had been involved with the Second NVA Division, had said they were trying to bait us and get rid of us. That was their plan, uh, and not just my company, but you know, 3-5-1-5 Marines. They just wanted to get rid of us, and that was all part of planning for Tet later on down the road. So when we got there and did what we did during Swift, that kind of knocked the second NVA division out of service for a while, and they didn't really have much to do with Tet. I
Okay.
find out this later, of course.
Okay. So the second NBA then is in the valley trying to bait the Marines, the battalions, because I'm assuming the NBA have a superiority in numbers,
Yeah, they would. Yeah.
right? Maybe not air power and all of that.
Oh no, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that we'll find out about that. But so they're basically trying to bait you guys in and then spring ambushes
Yeah. Right.
where they have numbers on
Right.
you. Okay.
Right.
All
And
right.
that's exactly what happened with my company because we were 175 Marines, let's say somewhere around that number. And my understanding is there were up to 5 or 6,000 NVA in this one area. Um, I could be wrong on that, so I'm not going to say that's a factual number, but that's my understanding. So they definitely had a superior number, and they were trying to envelop us with what's called a well, it's an L-shaped ambush, and so they were going to try to, as we moved into our position, they were going to surround us and get rid of us. But they sprung the ambush too soon, which allowed us to find some sort of cover to some degree. But during this time, I found out that my radio didn't work.
It,
And
just to back up a little bit, an L
yeah,
shape would be meaning they would kind of ambush you from the front, the direction you were going,
well,
from a side,
it
maybe.
was it was from our perspective, it would be from the right side, which would be the east side, closer to the Lai Lai River. And when we got past them, uh, north to south, when we got past them, then that bottom leg would become an L that would come around behind us,
Okay.
which they started doing fairly soon.
So kind of a
Because we,
front and a flank.
yeah, and what made it even worse was that third platoon had been cut off, so we only had first and second platoon in this area where they were trying to ambush us.
How many men would that be then for the two
Well,
platoons,
if you
roughly?
go by full complement, you say 45 per platoon. So we had less than 100, counting the um, command platoon, the CP. So we had less than 100 Marines that had several thousand NVA trying to get rid of us, trying to ambush us.
So
Um,
5 to 1, 4 to 1.
yeah, would be a very believable number.
Okay.
And
And could you
and of
see
course, not all of those
India?
100 were riflemen. You had command center, you had corpsmen and such. But anyway, when I got separated from Sergeant Marbury and found out my radio wouldn't work, that created a big problem because nobody could see where I was and the rest of I say my squad, the squad I was with, they couldn't see us. So they didn't know what was happening to us. And the only radio down there was my radio, and it didn't work.
And you were the radio operator for second platoon. Is that
There
correct?
were two of us.
Okay.
And uh, the other radio operator had stayed with our platoon commander, Lieutenant Wexman.
Okay.
And he was where he was supposed to be, up on top of this little, what we call a knoll, little hill.
Mhm.
And he was up there in fortunately, there were a bunch of old bomb craters. And some of the guys were able to get cover. He was in a bomb crater with Larry French, the radio operator, but he could not see us.
Okay.
because of the way the knoll was shaped. And so I'm down there. I can hear people talking, but they can't. I figured it out really quick. They couldn't hear me. So Santos, Al Santos, that was his name that I was with. His rifle jammed right away. Gave him my rifle. Now I'm trying to communicate. Probably changed my battery. We always took two batteries. Still didn't work. Now my rifle that I'd given to Santos, it misfired.
So tell me a little bit about that real fast. The M16
Yeah,
seems like that was a huge problem on this operation.
correct.
Tell me about that just a little bit. Was that a problem for everybody?
Well, yeah, you could say everybody could have it happen to them. That's right. Um, the problem, I won't go into great detail, but the problem was that we had the wrong powder in the cartridges, which caused the chamber to get dirty. And they said it didn't need to be cleaned. So we had no cleaning gear. And so the chamber would get carboned up and a round would be fired. The cartridge would get stuck in the chamber, and the extractor would just pull the back of the cartridge off and try to feed another round in, which would cause what we call a double feed.
Hmm.
At that time, you had to take something and punch out the barrel. You had to open up your rifle and from the barrel and punch out, put a stick or something in there and punch that cartridge out. Otherwise, it won't work at all, of course.
Okay.
So that happened a lot.
Okay.
Eventually, ironically, the same basic rifle is still being used today, but they've made vast improvements with it.
Okay.
But so I'm there with no rifle. Santos has no rifle. I have my bayonet on my rifle. He has my rifle. Now we don't know what we're going to do. All we got is grenades and bayonets. But right about that time, we got the order from Larry Peters, squad leader, Sergeant Larry Peters, to pull back up on this hill. And so I started to pull back up the hill. I don't know what happened to Santos. I have no recollection. I heard he later was killed, but I don't remember that at all. But I'm trying to go up this hill. And it turns out when we went there in 2009, I believe, is that right? The part where I was kind of steeper than the other parts. And I've got my radio off, trying to fix it. And I'm dragging that. I got my pack on my back. And I'm also not going to stand up because the rounds flying everywhere. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to die because I'm not going to stand up. I'm just going to try to crawl up the hill. Hopefully I'll make it. And all of a sudden, as I said in one article, the hands of God reached down and saved my life. And that was Father Capodanno.
Wow.
He, again, with my understanding from not at that time, but since then, he had been with 3rd Platoon when this happened, ran across an open area about 100 yards wide and teamed and went in the foxhole with Lieutenant Blecksmith. And then when all the firing started, he went to jump out of the foxhole, and Lieutenant Blecksmith said, "Father, where are you going?" He says, "Well, I have to be with my men." And I asked Ed, I said, "Well, why didn't you stop him?" And Ed said, "What do you want me to do? Hit a priest?" So there went Father Capodanno. And
this
I
is
had to
all
be,
under fire, right? I mean,
yeah,
you got
yeah.
just
Now
heavy.
it's just like Niagara Falls. You can't make out individual gunshot wounds firing. It's just like Niagara Falls.
Could you see the
And
NVA at all? Could you make them out, or were they camouflaged?
well, let me get to that in a second. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll answer that. Um, and so Father Capodanno must have got to my position one of the first ones because it was only like 5 or 10 minutes after this started that he helped me up the hill. And then later on, he went and did some other things that ended up being killed. So he throws me in this bomb crater, and it's deep enough that I can sit up in it without having my head above ground level. So I'm still working on my radio. Well, let me back up. So he throws me in this bomb crater. I thought he was going to stay there with me, but he says basically either hand signals or really, there's so much noise you can't really talk, but somehow we communicated that he had to go out and help other Marines. And so I gave him my gas mask because for some reason where I wasn't affected. And our Hueys had dropped some gas to hopefully disperse the enemy, but all it did was blow back on us. So I offered him my gas mask, and he made the motion of, no, you keep it. You need it more than I do. So then he went on to help some other Marines. I'm sitting there in this bomb crater. Now I realize that I can hear on the radio, but I can't transmit. The batteries weren't completely dead. It takes a lot more power to transmit than it does to receive.
Okay.
And I'm trying to still figure out how I can fix this. there was a little noise, or I don't know, close by noise. I looked up, and here's two NVA, full battle dress gear, green uniforms, hand grenades, AK-47s, helmets, the whole bit. They looked down at me. I look up at them, and I thought, well, I guess I'm going to die because I couldn't throw a grenade at them too
Mhm.
close. I didn't have my rifle with a bayonet. I guess I could have thrown a bad battery at them. They just kept walking on by.
Huh.
Either they were stunned or on dope or something. And they went
Okay.
off towards the direction of the CP. And I don't know what happened to them after that. So they
Wow.
were in full battle dress uniform, uh, and had all the kind of gear that we would have in their possession. And so after that situation, again, divine intervention is the only thing I can say.
Mhm.
And uh, I guess I moved around a little bit according to my audio tape. I moved from hole to hole, or and communicated. In other words, I figured out by somehow I could got the message back to the CP that I could hear them. I don't know how I did that, but maybe whatever. So they would say something, and I would then relay that information to various Marines, either by hand signals or going there and yelling at them or whatever. So that happened during the rest of the day.
So you guys were basically on a knoll, surrounded or almost surrounded
Mm-hmm.
by, I guess, camouflaged NVA. Would that be correct?
They had bushes in their helmets.
Okay.
And in fact, Jack Swan, before everything started, he says, I think I saw a bush move, and Lieutenant, first platoon lieutenant, told him, well, if it moves again, shoot it. And he
Okay.
did. And that started it. So
Okay.
yeah, they were a lot of them had bushes on their bodies trying to camouflage and stuff.
And they were basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were trying to wait for you Marines to get into kind of a low area and then spring an ambush. Is that correct?
Well, correct. If they had waited another 5 minutes, they probably would have wiped out first and second platoon. But they
Okay.
sprang it early, which allowed us to get some cover.
Okay. And that the cover on, I
The
guess the
knoll.
hole in the high ground gave you guys some cover.
Yeah.
But they're still doing everything that you're talking about. They're basically attacking
Oh
uh,
yeah.
with
Yeah.
mortars and the
Rockets and
AK-47s, rockets,
automatic weapons. Yeah.
trying to break through to, because if they break your perimeter, that's it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if,
Yeah.
okay. So you guys had formed a perimeter around this knoll. Is
Somewhat. Yes. Mm-hmm.
okay. And you're basically trying to do that and communicate with your leaders about how to maneuver and
Yeah.
you
Where
and
we
have
are.
the
Mm-hmm.
issues that you talked about. Okay.
Right.
So yeah, you're in your hole, but then yeah, tell us about Fred and Tanky and what he saw and what he told you.
Well, my understanding, and from Fred and others, that we've communicated over the years, and our stories independently verify the timeline, what they did, what Fred did. So there's pretty good information from the entire second platoon members that survived, that what Fred's story was accurate, that it was accurate. And he was the pivot on this. When we were going to pivot around, he was the pivoting point, and the rest of the Marines were pivoting on him from a column to a online position. And right after everything happened, Fred discovered that there was a wounded corpsman, Armando Leal. And Armando had gone to help some guys that had got hit, but he had gotten hit in the femur artery, right leg, I'm not sure, but anyway, femur artery of the leg. And Fred was trying to help him and also fire at the enemy. And so Leo was saying, "Put your finger in here. I'm going to bleed to death if you don't put your finger there." And so now his fingers are slippery, and he's trying to fire with one hand, his rifle, and he had fired about a magazine and put in the second magazine, had a double feed, so now his rifle's done. And so Leo says, "Leave me," and Fred says, "No, we're both going." And they're trying to get up the knoll to this hole. He saw some Marines in a bomb crater. He's trying to maybe 20, 30 feet away, let's say, from where Fred was. And so he's trying to help Leo. And then he turned around and saw that Leo had died.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't until then that he was sure that Leo had passed away that Fred took off, because he saw this machine gunner ready to fire on both of them. And so
Mhm.
Fred dove into this hole, landed on top of somebody, broke his nose with his helmet when he landed. And there were several Marines in there, John Lober and two others, Sergeant Marber, I believe, and one other that had wounds in both shoulders. And Fred said, you know, there's a gunner out there. You got to get that gunner. And then here comes Father Capodanno. Fred, maybe he didn't stand fully upright, but he got it high enough. So he yelled, watch out, here comes the gunner. And right then the machine gunner fired and took out Father Capodanno.
So was
Somewhere between 4 to 8 rounds were fired by the machine gunner that killed Father Capodanno.
where was the father headed? Was he headed toward the
He was
corner?
heading, well, that's a matter that we probably will never know. He was heading towards Lille, but there were some other Marines that were past Lille in that the direction he was going, which let's say was kind of going across the knoll and some went down to the base of the knoll. So we're not 100% sure, but he landed within 10 feet of Armando Leo, the corpsman.
Okay.
But nobody's real sure exactly what his mission was. He was going to go stop at the first person he came to, I'm sure, and try to give him help.
Was he giving them last rites? Was he giving them first aid, or do you know?
I can't speak to that firsthand. I did see him administering to, I'm just going to say a Marine because I get Cornell and Carnell mixed up. Right when he left me, he had gone to a Marine and he could have been patching him up and saying last rites. I'm not sure, but I know my understanding is he was basically doing both, trying to help him.
Okay. All right.
So he was killed within the first 30 minutes of the battle. And there's been a lot of discussion about the timeline. And the reason that's important is that he was the only one running around trying to help people. Nobody else was exposing themselves to gunfire. And had we done that, we would all been dead. And the important part of that was that the rifle fire and machine gun fire was so severe that that's why he was killed in the first 30 minutes. It just wasn't possible for someone to stay upright that long, really.
The
And
fire was that heavy.
it was extremely heavy. And there's been talk about it was 4 or 5 hours, and it just wasn't. Nobody could have survived 4 or 5 hours on that battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And we had pretty much suppressed the fire once we got our air power and artillery going within the first hour. And
Okay.
then it tapered off a lot because we were getting a lot of support.
Okay. What can you tell me about Sergeant Peters? I know that he was a squad leader and he was
Mm-hmm.
kind of forming the second squad of second platoon, if that's correct. Or what can you tell me about him?
Well, again, I don't have firsthand knowledge of Sergeant Peters' actions, but in speaking with several of second platoon members, Fred and others, Fred Tanky and others, it appears that he was somewhat up the knoll a bit, and there was a lull in the firing, and he realized that the Marines that were farther away down the knoll could not survive down there. So that's when he gave the order to fall back up the knoll. And if he hadn't done that, we would have probably stayed there and been killed. And
Okay.
so his actions, even though he was wounded several times, finally he was fatally wounded. His actions saved a lot of people that day.
Okay.
And Carlton Clark, I'm not sure if you're able to get a hold of him. I thought I had his address, but the last Christmas card came back, so I don't know where CC is.
Hmm.
But he said the Our Father with Sergeant Peters.
Okay.
It wasn't Father Capodanno, because Father Capodanno had been killed before that happened, before CC got to it.
Okay. And
And
that's after Sergeant Peters was fatally wounded or
yes,
mortally wounded. He said the Lord's Prayer with Sergeant Peters. Carlton Clark did.
yes,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So,
And
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I just go, and CC remembers that very vividly, that happening.
Okay. So you said air power came in, and tell me a little bit about that. Did that kind of save the day for you guys, or did it?
Oh,
Or
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah. Without, of course, it's not at the same time. Quite often you'll get artillery support first, and then when the air power arrives on scene, the artillery, of course, has to stop.
Sure.
And but the artillery did a lot. We had a couple Huey Cobras, not the specific. Well, I won't say Cobra. We had a couple of Huey gunships that were helping us. But artillery made a big difference. And then finally, the jets showed up and made all the difference in the world. And,
So they were
saved our
able
bacon.
they were able to catch, I guess, the NVA out in the open
Right,
and
right.
bomb them so they could take the pressure off of you. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, we were having bombs dropped within 100 yards of us or closer. Some were 2,000 pounders, and they definitely have a concussive effect,
Hmm.
of which I've suffered a mild traumatic brain injury ever since that day.
Wow.
And I had to deal with it. Of course, there's other Marines and other military people that suffer the same thing. Sometimes you just don't know you have it because they used to call it shell shock. Right?
Okay.
And it was just dismissed because you can't do anything for it.
Right.
But now they found out a lot more, of course, medically about that particular type of injury, which are still happening today in Iraq.
Okay.
And so, um, I lost my train of thought.
We were talking about
Oh, the jets.
the
Yeah.
big, then I think napalm maybe.
Oh, yeah. They dropped napalm, mostly 250, 500-pound bombs. They fired 20 millimeter cannon or maybe 7.62 or 50 caliber rounds. And so they put down a lot of firepower. Plus, the AC-47 gunship, of which we called Puff, uh, after Puff the Magic Dragon, Peter, Paul, and Mary song. Um, it was there, and my understanding of that is they started at 1,000 feet and elevation, and the NVA had at least three, if not four. Their 50 caliber are a 12.7 millimeter round, and
Machine gun.
we just called them quad 50s.
Okay.
And they were firing at the jets, and they started firing at Puff, and so Puff went up another 1,000. Finally, they ended up at 10,000 feet and said, "We're going home." There was just too much anti-aircraft fire for an AC-47. That just wasn't safe for them. And so as the night started, and this was kind of really a crazy thing that happened, and there's been some controversy over it, but I was able to get some confirmation from some other people. I was starting to get dusk, and there was one quad 50 that they weren't able to take out. As soon as a jet would make its run towards that quad 50, it would fire at him. He had to veer off, otherwise he would have been knocked down, would have been hit. And so they came up with an idea, and I was told this happened during the Union operations too. And I am as positive as I can be. There were two F-4 Phantoms, but again, I'm not going to bet my life on that, but I'm pretty sure they were, because on that particular run, they became my favorite airplane. So, it's
Okay.
fairly implanted in my memory. The Phantom came in just like he was before, firing his cannon. And sure enough, the quad 50 opened up on him. Now, I also say that he turned on his landing lights. They're pretty bright. And just for a moment, he turned them on and lit up the quad 50. What the enemy didn't know was there was another F-4 right up the tail of the first one. So when the first one peeled off, the quad 50 followed the first one. The second F-4 went right down there and took it out to quad 50. John Lober and I jumped out of our bomb crater cheering like we won a football game. And John verified that did happen.
So it was
So
a
that was
bait
quite
and
an
switch
exciting time.
kind of
I'm sorry.
it was kind of a bait and switch, meaning
Yes, it was. Yeah.
first
Yeah.
F4 was a bait and the second one
Uh-huh. Took him
came
out.
in, took him out. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It was quite a sight.
Do you remember at some point CS gas being dropped?
Yes.
And
And
why
it
was
was,
that? Or tell me about that.
well, I think there were two drops. And John Lober probably has a lot more detail than I do. The only one I remember specifically was when it was dropped early on when I offered Father Capodanno my gas mask. But I believe there was a second drop. But that I can't speak to. I don't have any knowledge. I don't remember a second drop, but other Marines do remember a second drop. And they were trying to drop it on the enemy to cause them to retreat. But unfortunately, just like if you start a campfire, the smoke will blow where you are, and that's kind of what happened. It blew back on us. It may have been somewhat effective against the enemy, but I don't know if that was a big factor.
Okay. Okay. Tell me a little bit about the company commander, J.D. Murray. I
Uh-huh.
understand he was a lieutenant, but had a great deal of experience. Tell me about him as a commander.
Well, as things go, when you're a grunt in a rifle company, the only time you might meet the company man commander one on one is he pins a Purple Heart on you or another medal. You might see him give a talk to the company, maybe for an award ceremony, possibly. But I am 100% sure I did not know who J.D. Murray was until I met him in 2002.
Wow.
I had never met him before. Um,
Why was that, you think?
well, like I said, when you're in the rear area, you're in a tent that's a platoon is in, I believe, maybe a squad, but it's broken up, at least four tents, if not more. And the officers' quarters are not where you are. They're removed in the battalion area from where the rifle companies are. And so you don't see the officers that much at all. Platoon commanders, yes, like Lieutenant Blacksmith.
Mhm.
But the other company commanders, you just don't see that much. Now, my understanding was that JD was a XO executive officer when 3-5 first made an actual amphibious landing in '66 to arrive in Vietnam. I think JD was an executive officer at the time. He may have been a platoon commander also before or after that. I'm not sure. And then he joined my company as a company commander in the late spring or early, had to be the early summer because he was not our company commander on Union 2, which ended on June 2nd or 3rd. Um, uh, Captain McElroy, I guess I can't speak to exactly why, but a lot of the Marines called him the judge. Um, maybe that's what he went into when he got out of the Marine Corps. I'm not sure. But his last name was McElroy, I believe. And I don't remember really seeing him that much either. You just didn't run across the company commander unless you were the radio operator for him or something like that. And so JD was there during Swift, but that was his first command of a rifle company was Swift. And then he left before Essex in November. He went with us on Shelbyville after Swift. So he was really company commander for just those two operations.
Okay.
And then he went on. Of course, he stayed in Vietnam. He was with. He went up towards the DMZ towards the end of his tour. He was up there when the NVA crossed the DMZ and invaded. That would have been what, 73, I guess. But yeah, I didn't really meet JD until we had a reunion.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me then how September 4th ended. I guess the bombing had an effect on the enemy.
Yeah, because in my audio report, I say that after that last Quad 50 was taken out, nothing happened the rest of the night. Some choppers came in around midnight, and we thought we might get mortared, but nothing. We had absolutely no action all night long, from say 8 o'clock at night until whenever the sun came up the next day.
Okay.
And then I went on a squad size patrol with now a radio that worked, and we found that Quad 50, and the people manning it and the Quad 50 were just bits and pieces. That
Okay.
a couple of 500-pound bombs that hit that directly, and there were bits and pieces of parts and humans.
Okay.
And we went through a village and came back. So that was how it ended, and went into the 5th. And there was other action later on. The 6th, there's some pretty heavy action. The night of the 12th or 13th, we were still out in the field on Swift, and there was some heavy action. Well, let me back up on that. The only action I know about occurred, and it was a friendly fire action. And the reason I want to mention this is the AC-47 gunship that fired on us did that by accident because they didn't have our coordinates. There was a mix-up, and they didn't get our coordinates. But I don't think they ever told that. And so they thought they had fired. They thought they were firing on the NVA, and they were firing on a unit I was with out on a listing post. And one Marine on my right, who was Larry Nunes, was severely wounded. And the Marine on my left, I believe his last name was either Carnell or Cornell. That's where I get them confused, was killed. I was 10 feet away on either side from both of them. I didn't get a scratch from 3,000 rounds a minute ammo being fired at us. Guys on either side of me were hit and killed. I didn't get a scratch.
Wow.
Divine intervention again. So that last action, unfortunate action, concluded swift, really. And we got back, I think, on the 15th or so of September.
Could you tell me about the rest of your tour? How much longer were you in Vietnam?
Well, after Swift, Fred Tankey started the ball rolling on Father Capodanno's Medal of Honor because nobody had started to write him up. So Fred did. And then I did because of what he did for me. And there were three other guys that wrote him up. And then there was Operation Shelbyville. I can't tell you for sure if I was on that operation because I think I missed it because I was on R&R in Hawaii. I met my wife, Sherry. We'd been married in December of 65. And I joined the Marine Corps in September of 66. And so she met me in Hawaii right at the end of September, first part of October, I believe. And kind of ironically, when we got back, I landed in Da Nang and I went to wherever the office was to say, okay, I need a ride to Mike Company 35. They says, we don't know where they are. What do you mean you don't know where Mike 35 is? What? And they said, just go back to the barracks and hang out for a while. So I did for a while. And that was the same basic time that a really big, what they call typhoon had gone through that area. And so then they said, okay, we know where Mike Company is. They're south of Da Nang. Hop on this. It wasn't a 6x. It was like a pickup. So it was a 4x. And we start down Highway 1. As you've noticed, Highway 1 isn't much of a highway. Some of it's elevated above the rice paddies by quite a bit, even up to 10 feet in some areas. So we get out of Da Nang, across, I guess it would have been called Liberty Bridge, and we get out on the main road, and all of a sudden, there's no road. It's an entire lake. For as far as you could see, to your left and to your right and in front of you, it's just a lake of water. That's how much water had come down in this typhoon. And we got to a checkpoint, and the guy says, wouldn't recommend going any farther. The driver says, oh, we can make it. Well, right after that, the vehicle started floating. So he figured he should turn around. The only problem was he's up on this elevated roadway, and he can't tell where it ends. Well, fortunately, he was able to maneuver the vehicle and turn around and go back to the base. And eventually I got on a chopper and joined my company. And that's, we kept moving. My company was at Hill 69 near Chu when I got there in February. We then moved to Hill 63, which is going north towards Da Nang. We discovered that hill. I got pictures of it when it was nothing but a hill. I didn't know I had them. I just accidentally found them a couple of years ago. And when we left Hill 63, the Army took it over, and we'd done all the work. And they didn't have to dig any foxholes or anything. Good old Army moves in behind us. They get hot chow taken out to them on what we call mules, little flatbed vehicle, where we were eating sea rations when we were on bunker duty. So anyway, my company had moved from Hill 63 to another location closer to Da Nang called Anderson East and Anderson West, named after a Marine who was on a minesweep and was killed. And this was not a mountain. It was just a flat area in a big rice paddy, and the bulldozers had made a perimeter, maybe 10-foot high perimeter all the way around us. And so that's where I landed when I came back from an R&R. We then went on Operation Essex, which was in what the Marines call Antenna Valley, which is real close to the Laotian border. So that would be east of Da Nang. And we were supposed to ride Amtraks. They had 6 Amtraks, amphibious tracked vehicles. And and by the way, we had run out of food on Union 2, and I didn't have anything to eat for 4 days. Nobody did. But when I was wounded, I got into Chuai, and I ate everything in sight and was sicker than a dog. I said, okay, don't do that again. So, but I figured I'm going to take a lot of chow this time because I'm riding on an Amtrak. So I had a sleeping bag, I had ponchos, I had food, I had everything. All 6 Amtraks got stuck, pulling each other out of the mud, so we had to walk. So anyway, we're on this Operation Essex, going up a terraced rice paddy area, and we're basically chasing the enemy. And one on the 7th, yeah, on the 7th of November, we sat down to take a break, and one of the Marines, I think his last name was Fisher, sat on one of our ordnances, either a 155 artillery round or a 250-pound bomb that had not gone off. They booby trapped it. He sat on it. There was nothing left of him. Hmm. I remember getting up off the ground and saying, what happened? I was that close to him. And then I remember putting him in basically baggies, because that's the biggest pieces we could find, including his dog tags. That same day, a new lieutenant, brand new, been there a week or so, Dale Loudon was killed when he was first platoon commander at that time, and he was killed. And the night of the 7th, there were some other Marines killed or wounded, and they couldn't get him on board a chopper, and the choppers didn't want to fly after dark for some reason. So a group of us carried his body all night because we were on the move. That was a tough ordeal, not just psychologically, but ponchos don't have any handholds on them, and all we had to carry him was with a poncho. So you've got one corner of that poncho you've trying to grip onto and hold and not drop him, Mm-hmm. So that was a pretty tough ordeal that night. And there's a little bit of information on Debbie Reynolds' website about that, written by Tony Martinez, I think. He was part of that detail. And so the next, and by the way, the next day, on the 8th, we were walked right into another ambush by a new company commander. He got us lost. We were so lost that he didn't know where he was, and battalion did not know where we were either, so they couldn't give us any support. Wow. And we were walked into an ambush, and I had all this weight on me. I had like 80-pound pack instead of a 40 or 60-pound pack. And we were going in a direction where we had to slide down like a 4-foot-high berm going down into a creek. And I literally thought to myself when I did that, I sure hope we don't have to go back up it, because I don't think I can make it with all this gear, because it had gotten kind of wet, during the process. So sure enough, we get ambushed, and John Lober kept yelling, there's gooks out, there's NVA out there, there's VC out there, there's the enemies out there, and this company commander just said, keep going. And so sure enough, we got ambushed, and we were getting hit from 3 sides, left and right and front. So the only place we could go, we thought, was to our rear, the way we'd come down into that creek. And what we didn't know is the enemy had surrounded us, and basically we overran them by mistake and chased them out of the way. We didn't know this at the time. And so I'm going along, get to the creek, and there's Dennis Flood laying face down in the creek. He was a radio operator at that time. I wasn't. Dennis yells, and I help him up the hill, the little berm. I had no trouble going up that berm. Again, adrenaline will do wonders. I went right up it, no problem. And so then that night, I know this is a little long, but it's kind of some interesting tidbits here of what happens during a Marine expedition, so to speak. That night, we couldn't really dig in, and we were just along a trail, but it was really heavy foliage on, let's say, the creek side and the other side of the trail. The enemy wasn't going to go through that. So we really just had to guard each end. Well, I was on this end sharing duty with Lieutenant Blecksmith, our platoon commander. And so we would trade off, hour on, hour off, whatever. And so I was on the extreme outside, and he was right next to me, 2 feet away. And I looked at my watch. Okay, time to wake up the lieutenant. And I turned to look at it, and either it was a 45 or an M16. It doesn't matter. The point was, he had his finger on the trigger of the weapon. It was pointed right at my head. And I thought, how am I going to wake him up without having him pull the trigger?
Wow.
Because it was like a foot away. And so I very gently was able to make a non-startling noise and woke him up, safely, obviously. So the next morning, during that night, in fact, we had a lot of machine gun fire. And I told John, I was with John Lober at the time, I said, John, I can see the machine gun fire. should I take him out? I had a law that I had with me, a light anti-tank weapon that was a replacement for the 3.5 rocket launcher that was much heavier. Of course, they were more effective too. But I said, John, should I take him out? And John says, yeah, you got the law. Take him out. And I said, okay. So the law is only about 1.5 feet long or 2 feet. Then you can extend it to its full length. And when you do that, you turn on the fire, move the fire button or however that works, and you put your finger on the trigger and you get a fire at it. So I got him zeroed in, and all of a sudden the machine gun fire stops, dead silence, and the blinking continues. It was a firefly. I almost took out a firefly, which would have definitely exposed our position. So fortunately, I did not. You know?
Wow.
So
Wow.
the next day, Lieutenant, the captain that was our CO, was replaced in the field by Captain. Good grief, his last name was Mitchell, James Mitchell, and so he joined us in the field. We were out on Essex a couple more days, went back to the rear, and then right after I got back, Captain Mitchell called me up to the command center and said, "You're going to be my radio operator from now on, and you're also not going to go out in the field on any operation that requires you to be out overnight." And I thought, wow, that's cool. I don't know what happened, but I'll go with that. That's fine. And so I was also his company driver. So I made a lot of trips into Da Nang to get soda, beer, cigarettes, whatever. And so that happened in November. So in December of 1967, December of 1967, we had an operation that was a 1 day thing, but the entire company went out. We were supposed to retrieve a 250-pound bomb that one of the jets had dropped that didn't go off. And we needed to get it so the enemy couldn't use it to booby trap people. And based upon where it was, Captain Mitchell says, "We're not going." The battalion says, "What do you mean you're not going?" He says, "We go out there, the bomb's going to be gone. I'm going to get people hurt. I'm not going to take them out there." Well, it went up to regiment and they came down and says, "You are going out there." Captain Mitchell says, "Aye, aye, sir." So sure enough, we go out there. A couple of guys got hurt, either sprained ankles or stepped on a booby trap, punji stick or something like that. There were injuries. So now we're sitting on a railroad trestle, Captain Mitchell and I. He says, "Well, what would you be doing if you were back in the world?" And I says, "Well, sir, my wife and I would be celebrating our second wedding anniversary. It was December 10th,
Wow.
1967. Oh, and by the way, we didn't find the bomb. It was gone. And so after that, I just stayed in the rear, did radio duty during the night and daytime, went on a few local ambushes and things, and until I rotated home. At the start of Tet, John Wilbur and I had driven into Da Nang, and we didn't know Tet was going on. And we came back, and we're driving down this dirt road off of Highway 1. Maybe it's a mile off of Highway 1. And usually there's water buffalo out there. Papa Sans are tilling the rice paddies. There's activity. Dead quiet. Nothing happened. John and I looked at each other and said, what's going on? And all of a sudden there were rounds going over our head. Oh, what in the world? Who's shooting at us? So then we got closer to the battalion area. We could see Marines giving us the sign to hurry up. So I stepped on the throttle and we went a little faster and got through the gate. And they said, "What are you guys doing out there? We've been getting incoming fire all day." It was the start of Tet.
Wow.
And we didn't even know it.
Wow. Wow.
So after that, not much happened. We moved to Phu north of Da Nang. I just stayed in the tent until I got my orders and rotated home somewhere in the middle of March of 1968.
Tell me about that when you got home. What was your reception like? What did you expect? Just a little bit about that.
Well, we've been told about it when we went to Hawaii because it wasn't quite as bad as the States, but there were some protesters there. So they kind of warned us, but Sherry and I didn't run into anything. Well, number one, I had civvies on. So, nothing happened. But they told us about back in the States, especially around LA. Of course, we landed at El Toro, south of LA. And so they told us about it. And was picked up by a friend, spent the night at his house, got on a plane and came home to San Francisco. Uh, again, I had my civvies on, so I didn't really have, I saw some protesters, but nothing happened. Um, Here in Modesto, it was still a sleepy little farming community, and so there wasn't much going on here. And I stayed basically in town. For my 30 days leave. I didn't have any reason to go anyplace anyway.
Okay.
And so when Sherry and I drove down to Camp Pendleton, I thought I was going to be in a grunt unit because that was my MOS 0311. So I showed up at Mainside at southern part of Camp Pendleton and was able to get into the 5th Marine Division band because I played an instrument in junior high and high school. And so the fact that we were wearing uniforms, dress blues, there's 50 or 60 of us all together, and we were in patriotic parades, and we were invited to perform by people that wanted us to be there. We didn't really have any trouble.
Okay.
We had one guy, typical long-haired hippie, decided to try to invade our ranks when we were waiting to form up. We were standing on a street corner. He came into our ranks, 50 or 60 Marines. When he left, he was naked.
Okay.
And that was about it.
Okay.
And
so what are your thoughts now, 60 years almost
yeah,
later, and what do you want, I guess, the American people to remember and to think about, with the war being, so far gone, not a popular war.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, when I went, all I had heard was there was this incident in a place called the Gulf of Tonkin, and then that other things had happened, and now we had to support the South. And so that's all I knew. I didn't know too much about the exact political climate. I mean, I was a newly married 19-year-old, and I wasn't paying a whole lot to news like that, And then when I got there, it just became a matter of survival. And you protect the guy on your left and on your right, and you're also trying to, we knew of the atrocities that the NVA and Viet Cong were committing. Unfortunately, we did some too, but we knew of what the enemy was doing to the civilians, so we were trying to help them. And when I left, things were getting fairly well pacified in the area around Da Nang. And then let's just go through to 1976, 1980. I'm trying to remember when Gerald Ford ran against Jimmy Carter. That would have been 76. And so before that, Gerald Ford was president when the South fell to the North. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, I was extremely upset with Gerald Ford because he had, quote, allowed that to happen. Well, what I found out years later was he had not allowed that to happen. He was not allowed to send the aid that we had agreed to in the treaty because Congress would not allow him, would not appropriate the money. And Gerald Ford, being a good moral person, was not going to go against Congress. And so that's why that happened. It wasn't really Gerald Ford's fault. So I was really upset with things like that. And I also thought that, well, the Vietnamese, when we left, they didn't care. They just gave up. Well, no, they didn't have the weapons because we weren't giving to them what we said we would give them. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of a bad time when I was not too happy about the way the war ended. But when I found out a little bit more from the historical standpoint, I thought, well, at least it stopped there. And yeah, the country is communist, but at least it didn't spread to India, for example.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Or Thailand. Cambodia and Laos are still kind of a mess, but
in remembering the veterans such as yourself and those that didn't come home that are on the wall and who we've lost since then, what do you want the American people to know about all of you? If that's a good question.
Yeah, when 9/11 happened, I thought I was pretty well over the thought of guys going into combat. But when we committed our military to go into combat, I got terribly distraught. It just was really traumatic. because I knew what they were facing,
Mhm.
and I thought it was necessary. Uh, you know, the guys that were lost in Iraq, was that really necessary? That's debatable whether it was or not. I can't really say, but it appears it wasn't necessary. Afghanistan, was that necessary? Well, maybe once we got the Taliban and bin Laden out of there, we should have come home. Because as that went on, Fred Tankey, myself, all the other vets, we sat around and would say, it's another Vietnam all over again. And sure enough, it ended up just as bad, if not worse.
Mhm.
And so the lesson there is, if you have a conflict, go in with the full, complete force that you have and get it over with quick and come home. Just stand there for 20 years trying to build a nation doesn't work. Um, our form of democracy isn't necessarily what other people want. And we have to realize that.
Okay.
Even though the United States, I still feel, is the best country in the world and is the most giving country in the world to support other nations, keep them from falling. You've got to realize that, Jesus is the only savior in our life. We're not the United States is not the savior of the world. Jesus is. And so sometimes we, quite often we get into situations we shouldn't be involved with.
Okay.
And and then the other thing too is, and this is a general thing about conflict. Unfortunately, our public schools are not teaching history like they should. I have a grandson who graduated from high school in, let's say 4 years, somewhere around 1999, in that time frame. And I was talking to Joe the other day. I says, well, what'd they tell you about Vietnam, Joe? And he says, nothing.
Mm.
There was nothing about Vietnam. Oh, it's a blurb on the radar. We were there and we lost and we came home. We never lost a major battle. What we did was we gave up and came home.
Mm-hmm.
And so that part of history has been distorted. The only war the United States ever lost. Wrong. That's not correct. We just gave up and came home.
So knowing that about public education and how this isn't being taught, and clearly from what you're saying, obviously the younger generation, they don't know anything about what we're talking about.
No.
So why is it important, do you think, to the story of this one battle to kind of be put out there to at least educate?
Well, that's the thing. Operation Swift became that when we got there and got ambushed. Then it turned into an operation to try to chase down the NVA and get rid of it, the second NVA division. If it hadn't been for the fact that a Catholic chaplain died on the battlefield, Operation Swift would be a footnote about any other battle in Vietnam like that, or any other battle like that in Korea or World War II or World War I or Afghanistan. It would be a footnote. It wouldn't be important because there's so many of them.
Okay.
What made Swift important was there's a Catholic chaplain that lost his life. But then when you start looking into it like you did, and if you start researching it, you run across the severe numbers that we were facing, the 5-to-1 ratio against us or greater. You then start looking at of second platoon, which if you want to say 45 Marines and a couple corpsmen who were both killed, there were 19 that were killed out of 45, or 18 out of 45. That's a pretty high percentage. Out of second platoon to carry on into the rest of Operation Swift, there was like 10 of us that hadn't either been killed or wounded that could carry on. So when you look at those kind of numbers and you think, oh my goodness, look at all these guys that lost their life, that were severely wounded, and they were fighting for a cause against communism they thought was right. And we haven't even learned anything about them. Those who forget history are bound to repeat it. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't want to have yourself or your children go through this kind of thing, you need to realize that, well, again, the good old adage, freedom isn't free. You have to have a military that's willing to sacrifice on the battlefield to keep your country free, because eventually it will not exist if you don't defend it. And so by talking about history, you know, the curriculum in junior high, high school, and college needs to be much better when you're talking about the history of the United States, including those major military battles, because we've lost all that. We just aren't teaching it anymore. So that, with your going forward with what you're doing, hopefully it will get to the right people. And, I'm not going to say it'd be 100%, but maybe even if just 25% of the educational um, uh, locations pick it up and decide they want to really get a little bit more military history involved in the history lesson of the United States. So that's the main aim of this, is to do that.
And, from my perspective, interviewing you guys and meeting all you guys, and you're right, we wouldn't know about this operation, but for Father Capodanno getting the Medal of Honor, because that obviously is rare, but it's kind of an example of those 1,000 other battles in Vietnam, Korea, and Iraq. It's
absolutely.
It's like just an example.
Yeah,
of,
that's right.
To me, the honor, fighting for your brother, good soldier, Marines you guys were, and I want to use the word honor again, in doing your job and fighting for your country, and the sacrifice that you guys made that nobody knows about. And the reason that I'm able to sit here in my nice, comfortable office with the freedoms I enjoy is because you guys went out and did this. And that goes for September 4th, 1967, all the years of Vietnam, all the years
Absolutely.
of World War II, Afghanistan, Iraq, Korea, all of it going all the way back, is because men and women have gone out and done that, and they're unknown. And we do know World War II more. We've got the museum in New Orleans, but that's fading away.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, so that's kind of my thought, is like, look and read and just learn and know. And we've got this wonderful country with all of its faults, but our freedoms, because you guys went out and did this and put your lives on the line for that. And to your average 18-year-old say, look, these guys were your age. Not that long ago, really. Not that long ago in the history of the world or the country. And this, could you do it? And do you think this country's worth doing it for? So that's it to me, just to make it a message.
Yeah, that's right.
Does that kind of the way you feel?
Correct. You could probably find several veterans that are still living, mainly from Korea forward, but you could probably find several that would tell you, the action that I was in, whether it was for a year or 2 years or 6 months or whatever, was very similar, very serious and severe, and lost a lot of guys. But how many people are out there that have never had a chance to tell their story? So you being the one that has taken upon yourself to tell this story I feel, is the story that is also telling the story of how many more hundreds and thousands of U.S. military veterans that haven't had this opportunity to tell their story. And it includes them. They're included in this, to have the general population, high school kids, look at this and say, well, I can't believe how many people in our past went through what these guys went through, how many hundreds of thousands, millions went through and dealt with it. And they're just unknown. Nobody knows their story. And so you've been able to take this and kind of pick up the ball and run with it. And hopefully this will get out to enough people that will tell this particular story, but it also includes the story of myriads of other people.